So big news, Tomy just randomly dropped a massive overview of Beyblade X and all of the parts and how the system works. A lot of it is stuff that we already knew, but it's nice to see Tomy footage of everything. It just makes everything a lot more clear. So we're gonna take a look at that first and then decide what is the best Beyblade X Bey. Tomy spent a lot of the video going over DranSword and kind of using it as the example for how Beyblade X actually works, even though it's, I guess, not the main character Bey. Still doesn't make sense to me. Let's talk about the blades first, because we already know pretty much everything about it. What we might not have known or realized is that these blades are pretty chunky. It's pretty thick, there is quite a bit of metal, so there's going to be a lot of attack, and even if you compare it to later generation Beyblade Burst stuff, it's still pretty thick. I would like to see these blades get a little bit more detailed later on, and while I love the way they look, some people don't, and if you compare it to later season Beyblade Burst stuff, there's just not really a competition. But we already knew that, so let's move on to the ratchet. If you didn't know, the ratchet is kind of what keeps the Bey's life together. Pretty much what Chick-fil-A does for me. But to take a deeper dive, it's what also gives the Beyblade its height. Right now it ranges from 60 to 80, but I'm sure we're gonna get some wider range, maybe 50, hopefully a 40. That way it's super, super low. I'm sure we're gonna get higher ones as well, like 90 or even 100. This video is sponsored by Mall of Toys. If you guys want to pick up any of the Beyblade X releases, Mall of Toys has you covered. From the starters to the sets and even some big bundles, they have everything you may need. I try not to miss out on the Battle Pass, but I recommend you guys get the Battle Set as well as Hell's Scythe. I think that'll be a great combo. The links will be in the description down below. Go and check them out. There's more differences to the ratchets than just the height though. There's also the blade count. No, not the layer blade, but the other blade. DranSword, for example, uses the 360 ratchet, so it's 6 millimeters in height, and it also has 3 of these little nubs around the ratchet. These little nubs just act like contact points, and if a Bey hits it and causes enough of an impact, that is what causes the burst. Another few things about the ratchet is that it really doesn't affect burst resistance, other than maybe having those extra blades or having less blades may affect the burst rate, but that's all up to the bit. We can also see a bit of copyright text that is put onto the blades. One is for Tomy, which makes sense, but we also see one for T/S. Maybe there's some super obvious answer behind this. I don't really know what company this is or what this means. We do know that Tomy is establishing T licensing here in the US, so could that be related? I don't know, but it's probably way more simple. Next up, we have the bit, which is such a simple little part, such a simple little piece, but it matters a lot to your Beyblade's performance. Right now, we have probably the most simple tips possible. We have flat, ball, needle, all of which are extremely standard for the beginning of a Beyblade generation. I am interested to see how these develop later. Not only do these bits affect if your Beyblade is going to be swinging around the stadium or sitting right in the middle as a defense type, they also affect your Beyblade's burst resistance. If you look at this comparison between all 4 of the bits, you can see that the balance and attack type are thicker on the stem compared to the other 2 typings. So how it works is that inside of the ratchet, there's this little gear, there's this little mechanism that keeps the ratchet connected to the blade. And whenever you insert the tip, I know what you're thinking. Whenever you insert the bit, it creates a bit of a tighter connection, causing the Bey to have better burst resistance. I like the system a lot. It's pretty cool. It's definitely really different compared to Beyblade Burst. However, I do wonder how they're gonna make the Bey's burst resistance vary. Say what you will about the durability of Beyblade Burst's teeth system. I think they were able to create a lot of variation in that some Beys had like gums, some had really sharp teeth, there were some that had like 2 teeth, but they were really thick. Every Bey just felt pretty different in the way that they burst. And as of right now, we have like 2 different types maybe, and I don't see how they could release more in the future that really change things up. This is completely unrelated, but we also have a name for what that little chip, that little design in the middle is called. And apparently it's called the gear chip. Not really that important, but now you know. So now we may be able to ask the question of what is the best Beyblade X Bey? But first we can ask, which one do you guys like the most? I put it to the test in a community tab poll that got over 11,000 votes, and the results are really not shocking at all. DranSword was the clear favorite with 58% of the vote. Next up, we had Hell's Scythe with 25%, Wizard Arrow with 10%, and then Night Shield with 7%. This isn't really the best poll because a lot of people are going to pick just the first one on the list, which was DranSword, but Dran does seem to be the fan favorite. It's the one that we've seen the absolute most of, it's the most aggressive one, and it has a really nice shape that a lot of people like. Is it the best though? I don't know. Hell Scythe is pretty interesting as well. It is a balance type, but it is pretty aggressive in its shape. It has these upward sloping kind of edges, and so it's going to be pretty attack heavy. It also has one of the higher burst resistant bits, so something to think about. And then we move on to the ones with the least amount of votes, starting with Wizard Arrow. This is the stamina type. I don't really like the shape of this one. I like the gear chip in the middle, but otherwise, probably my least favorite. It looks pretty small and thin, and I would even assume that it's probably the lightest one of the group. It's pretty tall as well, using the 480 ratchet, but it's on the ball tip, which is typically a defense tip. I will say though, from battles I've seen, this tip I think bursts a lot. And finally, we have Night Shield. This is the defense type, and is also one I'm surprised got the least amount of votes. Talking about the shape first, it does look pretty round, although it has some edges there for recoil. I would be interested to see how this Bey does when it's slow spun. Slow spin, slow spun, slow launched, whatever. Night Shield is pretty interesting as well, as Takara Tomy tries to advertise this Bey as having some sort of impact absorbency feature. They're trying to say that these 3 gaps in the blade cause it to absorb impact, although their video shows it being pretty recoily, so I don't know who to believe. So now that we've talked about all the Beys, which is the best Beyblade X Bey? After a bunch of research, I think the answer is Cobalt Drake. Okay, that was a joke. But seriously, we can't really determine how well these Beys are going to perform yet, although there are some things that I do like. I think that Night Shield is going to be pretty strong in its shape, in its design. I mean, it is a defense type after all. I'd be interested to see what happens if you combine the Night Shield blade with the bits that Hell's Scythe uses. The Bey that I like the least and I feel will have the worst performance is probably Wizard Arrow. But if I had a vote to choose one Bey over the rest, I would choose Cobalt Drake. But that's going to wrap up this video. If you liked it, hit that like button, hit subscribe to join the Nook Nation, and I will see you in the next one. Have fun, and Bey away.